You may not realise it, but we have an incredible time machine in this club. And we have managed to bring a gentleman named Charles Morton back in the 19th century. Here he is.
Music hall. Yes, that's true. Many people do credit me with being one of the main people behind the creation of what is called music hall. It was back in 1849. I was in Covent Garden visiting an establishment called the Evans Supper and Room and Supper Club. And I was quite impressed by the range of entertainment they had going on there. And it certainly gave me some ideas. And a few short months later, my brother-in-law and I bought a pub in Lambeth called the Canterbury Arms. Soon after that, I decided to put on a very special night. And we put on this special night, and we changed the name actually from the Canterbury Arms to the Canterbury Music Hall. And at the time, no one had heard of the phrase music hall. And we put on a much wider range of acts than you would normally see at that time. And it was a huge success. And we carried this on every Saturday for a while. And it was so successful, we decided to extend the night and also have it on a Thursday. However, when we started to do it on a Thursday, we admitted women. Now, this was a preposterous idea at the time. And I was roundly criticised by many people for doing such a thing. But it proved to be hugely successful. And it changed the makeup of the audience that we were getting into the club. And we also became a lot more refined than most establishments were at that time. The club was so successful, the music hall was so successful, within a year we built a new building next door, 700-seater building. Business was booming, and within another year that was too small for us, and we built another building, this time 1,500 seats, and we just kept getting more and more successful. We soon opened a place called the Oxford Music Hall on Oxford Street, and then the crown of our empire was a place called the Alhambra in Leicester Square, which is now actually the Leicester Odeon Cinema, but it was a fantastic music hall. And we soon found that one of the things that we did, we wanted to be very different from many of the other establishments at the time. Many people started copying what we were doing with the music halls, and so we wanted to be a little bit different to everyone else. So we made sure that all of our buildings had lavish ornamentation and decoration, and were very special. We even had art galleries inside, and it was something very different. And we suddenly found that the middle class actually started attending, whereas previously the music hall was very much just for the working class. And we had a number of middle class people started to attend. Now, as an impresario and having a few venues, I obviously needed to check up on our competition sometimes. So on one visit, I decided to go up to Glasgow, to a place called the Britannia Music Hall, which was an infamous place in Glasgow. And I was looking around the venue and seeing how it worked, and I noticed that on the balcony, which was slightly overhanging the stage, there was a number of 9 to 13-year-old boys all standing at the front of the balcony. And Glasgow was quite a notorious place at the time. And these young boys, if they didn't like the act that was performing, they would actually wee on the performers. Now you think that's bad. Not all of the kids obviously could get to the front of the balcony, so the kids that were standing behind, they weren't able to show their displeasure the way that their friends did. So they would throw horse manure at the acts. It was a very different time, obviously. But the music halls were getting quite a bad reputation, so I decided we really needed to sort of clean things up, and the Victorian Society some of the Victorian Society wasn't impressed with some things that were happening in the music halls at the time. So one of the things that I decided to do to try to change things was all of the acts that would perform in our particular establishments, we paid way over the market rates at the time. And soon we found that all of the top performers around were flocking to our establishments because we were paying so much. And within a short time, we created a star market for the first time, which hadn't really existed, and many of the top performers suddenly found they were becoming almost superstars. And to give you an example, there was a guy called George Labour who had an act known as Champagne Charlie. And we were paying him £120 a week. The average person in the galleries was earning around about £20 a year. And so just to give you the stark example of how much some of the performers were earning. Champagne Charlie had one of the part in his song, there was a song called Champagne Charlie, which talked about drinking Murray and Chandler. And he soon was actually being paid by the company Murray. And so it was the birth of celebrity endorsement, and a number of other performers soon also started being paid by their people that they started endorsing in their performances. Now the star turns in the music hall were the comic singers, because in those days, comedians as we know them now didn't actually exist. And the comic singers, you could say, were the ancestors of both comedians and also pop music itself. Because what would happen with most of these people is they would start off just as singers, and then they would, in between songs, they would start to develop some patter, start to develop some speaking to the audience, and soon this would turn into a few funny lines, and then they would get a better reaction. And this is how some of them sort of branched off and actually became comedians or comic singers, as they were known at the time. And there's a parliamentary report in 1888 that said, and you have to remember that our first music hall was in 1851. By 1888, the parliamentary report said that London now had 50 theatres, 43 concert halls, and 473 music halls. This was just in London alone. Soon the railways were spreading like wildfire across the country. And with that came quite a lot of sexual innuendo by the music hall songwriters at the time. And the moral crusaders weren't very happy about the amounts of sexual content that was sung and joked about in the music halls. But how could they outlaw a song that mentioned shunting, for example? So they had to go about other ways to try to put a stop to what was happening in the music halls. And they formed something called the National Vigilance Association, which was to encourage suppression of criminal vice and public immorality. And the main person behind this organisation was a lady called Mrs. Laura Ormiston Chance. And she was the bane of my life. In 1894, she did a particular study on the Empire in Leicester Square, which was one of the main buildings at the time. And she managed to get the building closed down. And a report in the Times, in the newspaper at the time, we have no right to sanction on the stage that which, if it were done in the streets, would compel a policeman to lock the offender up. The place at night is an habitual resort for prostitutes in their pursuit of their traffic, and that portions of the entertainment are most objectionable, obnoxious, and against the best interests and moral well-being of the community at large. She managed to get the theatre closed down until a screen was erected between the promenade and the auditorium. And there was a very vocal opponent of this act, and he was a young Sandhurst cadet by the name of Winston Churchill. Churchill said, "Did you see the papers about the riots at the Empire last Saturday? It was I who led the rioters," he boasted. Him and his colleagues tore down the screens, climbed up on the debris, and addressed the audience on the subject of liberty. And he later described it as his maiden speech. Churchill obviously went on to greater things, but it was unfortunately for me, Mrs. Chance, who actually more accurately reflected the moral period of it, or reflected the mood of the times. Unfortunately, the music halls all came to an end at the start of the 20th century, but it left us with a lasting legacy of comedians and pop music, and many of the nursery rhymes that we know now all stem from the music hall times. And music hall changed my life, but also, in return, music hall changed the face of Britain for the better. Mr. Toastmaster.